The most important difference between someone who successfully completes the process and gets their big fancy degrees and someone who doesn't is the willingness to push past these feelings of being overwhelmed. And that, of course, I'm simplifying it, making it sound easy. It's not easy, but that's the point. You wanted this challenge. So here it is. This is the moment. This is the deciding moment for you. What are you going to do?
What up, everybody? Welcome to episode 13 of the Grad Coach Podcast. I'm your boy, Dr. E, and I'm joined here today by Dr. Amy Murdock, one of our trusty coaches. Amy, pleasure to see you here.
Hi, Dr. E. Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Amy. You're going to help us out simplify, demystify, and take all the anxiety out of academia. You know what I mean? All the anxiety you put in, we're here to take it out. It's good to have you. Today's podcast is all about how to get unstuck when you're in the dissertation process. Now, I know we've done this in the past, but previously we focused on what happens if you're stuck at the outset of the dissertation process, what happens if you get stuck somewhere at the end of the dissertation process. Today, we're focusing on that middle piece, where if you've left the whole process alone for a long, long time and having to come back to it and find yourself still stuck in that same old rut, like you've been in the cave for months and months and months, can't see the light to save your life, and don't know what to do next. That's going to be the focus of our podcast today. If you're currently working on a thesis or a dissertation, or you're stuck somewhere along the process, and I assume you are if you're here with us, then feel free to click the link in the description to find some of our Work Smarter templates, or keep clicking through the rest of the links on our YouTube channel and figure out all the tips and tricks to make your way through the process. All right, Amy, I remember you told me something vague about fixing the problem of getting stuck in the process by remembering what got you started. You think I'd remember that a little bit better, but tell me what that means. What do you mean by remembering what got you started?
Yeah, so what I tell people is remember why you started this process to begin with. There was a reason. There was an event. There was a motivation there. There was something that just moved you and motivated you to do this. This is a huge, overwhelming thing. Doing a master's, doing a dissertation. It's massive. It's overwhelming. There was something that told you, like, yeah, I can do this. And I want to do it for X, Y, and Z reasons. And so when you've lost that feeling, you have to just kind of remember back to, why did I start this to begin with? What was I trying to accomplish with this? And just trying to get that feeling back.
So when you're talking about remembering what got you started, what you're really getting into here is this kind of recovering the ground of what started you off in the first place, right? And I feel like I kind of know what you mean. I've experienced the same thing with students myself in the past, where the key issue is just rediscovering, as you said, that original problem, rediscovering that original enthusiasm and rediscovering that original energy. And I feel like there's a practical way of getting around this, which is to say that, look, there was a contribution that the thesis was supposed to make in the first place. There was a field that the thesis was supposed to contribute to. And there was a problem that your thesis or dissertation was intended to resolve. Now, unless things have changed so dramatically in the course of the time that you've been, dare I say, procrastinating, but away from your work, and then come back to it, and that problem no longer exists, or somebody else has already solved it, or that contribution is no longer valid, and somehow the field has changed fundamentally, then I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think there's something to be said for going back to where you were in the first place and starting to rediscover and understand what it was that set you off and what it was that you were trying to solve, because there's still going to be some value to that, so that even if you have changed over the course of time, and Lord knows we hope you have, but even if you have changed over the course of time, that particular contribution and that particular problem that you were trying to resolve hasn't necessarily changed too dramatically over the course of that time. So the value of your work is still going to be there. So rediscovering that and remembering what got you started, like you said, Amy, could be the way to get you back into the flow of the whole process. How's that sound?
Whatever is going on right now in your life, it's not as though when you first started the process that it was completely obstacle-free, right? Like, it's not, if you remember back at that time of your life, okay, was there nothing going on? No, right? There's always going to be things going on in your life. There's always going to be life happening. So there's never going to be a period where you're going to say, hey, oh my God, I have all this downtime. You know what? I think I'm going to use some of this time to work on my dissertation. That's never going to happen. So you have to carve it out. You have to carve out the time and remember that there's always going to be a lot of things going on. You're always going to have to juggle things, but it's a matter of prioritizing this. It has to be prioritized because it's such a huge undertaking.
And remembering where that priority was in the first place. presumably is what we're suggesting here. This idea that somewhere at the outset of the process, you saw some value in that prioritization. You saw some value in doing what it was that you were doing, and you saw some value in the contribution, the problem that you were trying to resolve. So theoretically, prioritizing the same ways you did when you started off would get you back into the process of making the steps that you need to make in order to get you to the next stage of the dissertation. I mean, I agree with you absolutely. But that being said, see, it seems to me that these are all kind of like, internal issues. There's still the external problem that we want to take into consideration here, because it's not all necessarily going to be our own fault or what happens when we get stuck and we got stuck just because we ain't good enough or because we happen to get stuck there. Sometimes it can happen that you feel like you're stuck because maybe you're not getting the support that you're supposed to be getting. Or maybe the university isn't engaging in the way that you'd like it to. Or maybe your supervisor isn't as good as you want them to. Or maybe you're not getting access to the templates that you want to get access to. Or maybe you don't really know what to do. So that's to say you're not entirely sure of what you've done up until now makes sense. And whether or not that means that what you're going to do next should make sense. I mean, all of these things are the external versions of the same problem. So in that particular case, talk to me about what was that phrase you used? Being a squeaky wheel. Yeah, it sounds dodgy, but talk to me about how being a squeaky wheel helps and what that even means, Amy.
I know. It's kind of lame, squeaky wheel, but I mean, it works. Yeah. So what I tell my clients is that your chairs, your advisors, they're people too, right? Like they're busy. They have a lot of students that they're having to look over. So try to put yourself in their shoes. And if you were them, what would compel you to respond? So I have a lot of clients who send emails and they don't get a response. And I'm like, okay, well, what email did you send? And they're like, I sent my dissertation, and they're not giving me feedback. Well, I'm like, yeah, because you're asking them just to carve out hours of their day. That's not going to happen. So what I tell people, and this has really worked, is that compose a concise email that is maybe at most like 5 questions, right? And as yes or no as much as possible to try to elicit that feedback. And you're much more likely to get a response if you have just like maybe 3 questions in an email inside, rather than like sending your whole dissertation and asking for feedback. Because again, this is your journey and you have to be the captain of this journey for yourself, because that's not their job, right? Their job is to kind of offer you guidance and support, right? Their job isn't to decide about the progress. That's all on you. So I think students don't realize that they have more power. You have more power than you realize. But also it's something just about putting yourself in the position of your chair and think about, if you're not getting the response back in a timely manner, which happens a lot, try to make it as easy on them as possible.
So, all right. So let me get this straight. So when you're talking about being a squeaky wheel, you're kind of advocating for being that annoying, extra noisy wheel on the trolley and making sure you get the attention you get, just doing it the right way. Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know that I would use the word annoying, but...
Squeaky wheels are kind of annoying. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, yeah, okay. I guess it's annoying, but, intentionally so. Annoying with a purpose. So squeaky wheel just means that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's the thing that it persistently makes noise. So you send one email, you don't get the response that you need. So you send another one. You have to be persistent. And I have a lot of clients who think, well, I don't want to annoy them. No, annoy them. It's their job to respond to you. Like I said, they're people too. That's their role and responsibility. And sometimes you kind of have to remind them of that gently, professionally. But yeah, squeaky wheel means you send an email and you don't get the response that you need in the time that you send another one. Don't ever hesitate about sending multiple emails. I mean, okay, don't get carried away, but I don't think people will get carried away on that. They can always just ignore your emails, right? But what do you think about this, Doctor? Yeah, how long would you give somebody to respond? How long would you give your advisor or whatever to respond to you before you send another email?
I mean, for me, really depends on what my tuition fees were. You know what I mean? Like, depends on what you're charging me for the degree. If it's up in the thousands, I'm gonna give you about 15 minutes. You better respond to me, otherwise I'm knocking on your front door. Like, no, we're joking around, and it's kind of funny. But look, to be honest with you, I kind of feel the same way as you do, Amy. Like what you were saying a moment ago about, yes, being a squeaky wheel, being intentionally annoying in that respect. I wholeheartedly agree, and I agree for the reasons that you intimated. While it's true that they are human beings, That's certainly true, although some supervisors make me question whether or not that's the case. But still, putting that aside, that's for another day. But it is, broadly speaking, true that they are still human beings. And insofar as that is the case, and insofar as they are still human beings, they're liable to respond the way human beings typically will. So they'll, be busy. Sometimes they're going to ignore you because they've got other things going on in their mind. Sometimes they're not paying attention to the degree that they should be. All of these things are the case. So to some degree, putting yourself in their shoes, as you said earlier, Amy, kind of makes sense. Like, I don't entirely disagree with you. And that could help to nuance the emails that you send them, right? Because you're sending them more human, interactive emails, actual engagement, like you're talking to a real person, as opposed to talking to my supervisor or my chair or my authority figure standing over my thesis, determining whether or not I make the progress I think I want to make. So putting the sense of dread out of your head and being comfortable with being a squeaky wheel, I wholeheartedly agree with you. But to add to that, kind of in line with what you were saying a moment ago in terms of how annoying can I be here and how often do I want to pester them, I'll be honest with you, I never really thought about it as pestering them. I mean, the fact of the matter is that as busy as they may be, this is their job. Like, that's what you do, my guy. Like, I don't know, I hate to say it, but this is what you do for a living. I mean, if you don't like it, you might want to go do something else. This is what you do. I've been stuck with you for the purposes of supervising my dissertation or my thesis. You're stuck with me, however good or bad my dissertation or thesis is. And while it's true that we have to develop some kind of functional working relationship, and I don't want to be annoying to the point of pestering for pestering's sake, this is nevertheless, like you said, about my thesis, and I need to take a degree of ownership over this process, especially when you slap the fee on top of it. Which is to say that I'm within my rights, or I'm within reasonable bounds to just say, okay, look, I emailed you yesterday, or I emailed you 2 days ago, or I emailed you a week ago, and I still haven't heard back from you. I really need to start making the progress I want to make. And I don't know where you've been all of this time, and it would be helpful if we could have some kind of conversation. And again, maybe you don't want to phrase it the way I've said it, and maybe Amy is the more, polite one. Maybe that's why she's here, you know what I mean? To soften my image a little bit. But the point is, the more polite one to deal with this, that there's a way to nuance that email. And I think you're right, Amy, in what you were saying earlier on in terms of the conversations you have with your clients. But it doesn't occur to me at all to suggest that I might be annoying or pestering my supervisor so much that it could deteriorate the relationship. That doesn't occur to me in the slightest, for the reasons that you gave. You do have to take ownership on this. The stakes are higher for you than they are for them. This does matter more for you than it does for them. So I don't see why I'd be hesitant or why I'd be cautious in sending an email and just being like, hey, why aren't you doing your job? That kind of thing. Like, I don't disagree with you at all. I mean, how do you feel?
If you're having the thought of, maybe I should email them again. I think polite but firm. Stand your ground. Don't be wishy-washy, but also be professional, because I think that being nice but firm is you're much more likely to get a response than if you get kind of edgy with it and you're just like, well, I don't know why you haven't responded. As you said, Dr. Don't do that. I don't know what you're doing over there, but if you don't mind getting back from vacation, no, don't be nasty. That's not going to get a response. That's going to go take you in a whole different direction. Don't do that. But as I said, they're people too. They're busy. So, okay. So if you were them, what action would be more likely to elicit a response? A concise email that has just questions, yes or no, as much as possible. And if that's not possible, if you actually need feedback on a chapter or whatever, can you even copy and paste whatever section from the chapter into the email that you're really wanting the feedback on? In other words, don't send the entire dissertation and say, okay, need your feedback, unless that's where you happen to be in the process. So I would say just make it as easy on them as possible.
No, I completely agree with you. And look, I'd say that there's a slightly deeper, darker point here, right? Maybe it's not so dark, but nevertheless a slightly deeper point. Because in line with what you're saying, the fact of the matter is that they are, like you said, they're human beings. And as much as I'm trying to be a squeaky wheel, sometimes there's nobody in the supermarket to hear the wheel squeaking. You know what I mean? Sometimes they're just not there. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, so if they ain't around, They ain't around. And this can happen, right? So sometimes they're away, sometimes they're abroad, sometimes things happen in their life. And sometimes, as you say, they're just not going to be around. In those instances, I think one of the things that we can do in order to allay, or at least, if not entirely quell, but soften some of the anxieties that come from not getting the responses that we want from our supervisors, chairs, committee members, whoever they may be, supporting you through the process, is the understanding that, look, whatever you're doing, whatever research topic you're writing about, whatever dissertation you're writing, whatever thesis you're constructing, whatever it is that you're doing, the fact is that academic progress and academic contributions rely on two fundamental principles, which is accuracy and transparency, which are accuracy and transparency. See how I made that more accurate? See? But which are accuracy and transparency. Those two fundamental pillars, as it were, of all academic thinking. And what I mean by this is to say that, look, so long as everything that you're writing, everything that you're constructing, and everything you're composing is accurate insofar as humanly possible, and you have checked that and cited it and confirmed that that's the case. And then so long as you are absolutely transparent in that process, so you hide no secrets, you keep nothing hidden, you don't keep anything behind the scenes, as it were, or on the backstage, as it were, but you bring everything to the fore, you're open and honest about everything that you're doing and why you're doing it, why you interpreted this paper this way, why you interpreted that paper that way, why you chose those particular papers to write about in the first place, all of these things. So long as you're sticking to the fundamental pillars of transparency and accuracy the whole way through the process, even if your chair, supervisor, or whoever else it may be isn't responding to you at the time that you want them to, however squeaky your wheel may be, you know that you're moving in relatively safe directions and you're producing work that will at least relatively get you closer to what you're trying to do, so that when they do get back to you and that squeaky wheel does get loud enough for them to hear you, you've got meaningful progress for them to assess.
Yeah. And what I tell people is, at the end of the day, this is your journey. You are in complete control of curating. Well, okay, I shouldn't say complete, but you can control a larger amount of it than you realize. This is your journey, and so make it how you want it to be. We used to always say this in my program, you have to be your biggest advocate. No one else is going to do that for you in the way that you need. And sometimes, a lot of times, that is being a squeaky wheel. And I have had, on a few occasions, this has happened, and this is just reality. You are trying to give feedback, or the process and the progress is just not happening in the way that you want it to, and you've tried in all these different ways. You've gone to different people. You've gone through the appropriate channels, and it's still not working. This is sort of outside of your control, right? So, but what can you do? You can try to get another chair. So this has happened several times with clients, and this is just a reality that, again, as you said, you are paying for this process, right? And ultimately, they want you to be happy, right? Like, universities, colleges, they want their students. They need students or they wouldn't exist. They need good reviews, right? Like, everybody has a boss. I mean, I'm just saying. So in some cases, and you'll have to just kind of be the judge on that, you might have to try to take steps to get a new chair. What do you think of that?
Oh, I'm with you 1,000%. We don't need to go into my back history. Oh, I'm 1,000%. If you want to know what I did to my supervisors, oh my God, they're sitting there they've got anxiety about me. What are we talking about? Why do you think I'm Dr. E and they just watch it? Like, something happened. Right? We here for a reason. I mean, sometimes you got to celebrate your wins. But the point is, okay, so look, I'm with you on all of these things. So being a squeaky wheel is one thing. That's great. Making sure that you remember what it was that brought you to the process in the first place and the value and the contributions that you were going to make in your thesis or your dissertation or what have you, that's cool too. You and I both know there's this familiar phenomenon that we talk about. And that familiar phenomenon that we encounter with our students or our clients or the people that we work with tends to be that whole underlying anxiety, the easier to quit complex. You're stuck in the process. It's been a while. You've left it alone. You come back to it. You're still stuck. You don't know how you're going to make any progress. You don't know where to look and where to turn. And sometimes you find yourself in that position where it's just easier to quit. And at that point, you've said to me in the past that there's this whole breaking down the pieces of the puzzle thing. So if you break down the pieces of your puzzle, somehow that's supposed to help. I still don't know what you're talking about. Explain, Amy. What's breaking down the pieces of the puzzle?
Oh, okay. Well, let me explain it to you, Dr. E, in a way that you'll understand.
Thank you.
Okay. It's any big project, right? Like, it's anything that's overwhelming at first. You have a big puzzle that you're putting together with your thesis or your dissertation, but you don't put a puzzle together by putting all the pieces together at the same time. It's one piece at a time. You always have the big picture in mind, okay? But you do one piece at a, like, I'm a very visual person, so it's kind of everybody's different. But for me, like, I'm Gen X, so like I still print everything out. Okay, I'm getting better. When I was going through the process, I would write on note cards. And it was so helpful to know that, okay, this is what I can accomplish today. And when you're feeling overwhelmed, man, that matters. That takes that burden of being overwhelmed off your shoulders. Like, I know I can accomplish this in these hours today. And if you're really overwhelmed, then you need to, like, this is what I can do in the next half hour. This is what I can do right now. I am going to sit down and stare at this computer and just start typing in the stream of consciousness. If that's all you can do at this moment to get yourself out of the funk of being overwhelmed, then do that. Be kind to yourself. Know yourself well enough to know, like, because I had talked to so many people who are so much in their head. You can't think your way through the dissertation. You cannot think your way through it. You have to take an action, and that action will lead to other actions. It's amazing how that happens. But yeah, breaking it down into bite-sized chunks. So pieces that you can accomplish. This is what I'm going to do today. And you have that on your vision board behind you, like just writing it down, like even the act of writing, physically writing or typing or printing it and putting it on a vision board, whatever works for you, it doesn't matter. But as seeing it and then seeing it in parts, it's like, oh yeah, I mean, I can write a paragraph today. I can do that. So just do that and don't think about anything else. For me, that's just been really helpful.
I see somebody's been watching the podcast, Amy. I see somebody's been watching the podcast. We gave a suggestion just like this in a previous podcast. If you haven't seen it, I don't know what you guys have been doing. Go click through, watch all the rest of the podcast, catch up. Your boy Dr. E's been here the whole time. I don't know where you've been, but still. We mentioned a point about this in previous podcasts, the idea of breaking down your processes and what you're trying to work on into smaller, actionable bite-sized chunks, even if they are exactly as you said, even if they are really, really, really small chunks, really, really small pieces, things that are manageable for you over the course of the day. And even if that means that as you make your way through that, you give yourself like a little victory or a little reward for when you've made your way 5 steps through the process or 10 steps through the process, whatever the steps are that you've constructed for yourself. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to do. So I'm with you wholeheartedly here, Amy. I think you're absolutely right. And I think the important part about this is to develop an honest assessment of what remains of your work. So assuming you have stepped away from it for a long time and you've come back to it, which is what we're talking about today. And if it's the case that, some of the work has already been done and then a bunch of the work remains, an honest, practical, not moral, but a practical assessment would be a good indication of what it is that's left for you to do. So you'd sit down and say to yourself, okay, practically speaking, I've got these remaining steps. I've got to finish off this part of the methodology, for example, or I've got to finish off this part of my analysis, for example. I've got to do this quote, or I've got to make sure I've double-checked this source, or whatever it might happen to be. But you break down those steps exactly as you said, Amy, but on the basis of a really honest assessment of what it is that you've got left to do in practical, technical, functional, rather than moral terms. So to make that really, really, really clear, rather than saying to yourself, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or I wonder what's next for me to write, or should I say this next sentence, or should I write that next paragraph? What I've always said to clients in the past is if you're asking yourself those should questions, if you're asking yourselves like moral questions, as it were, should I behave, ought I to do this, or ought I to do that? Should I behave in this fashion, or should I behave in that one? Should I write this, or should I write that? As soon as you find yourself asking those kinds of questions, you know you're already heading down the wrong path, because this is not a moral problem. This is a functional, technical problem. So as soon as you find yourself asking the kinds of questions, what should I say next, or what should I write next, you know you're already heading in the wrong direction. In fact, you're heading back. What you must write next, or what's required for your project or for your thesis or for your dissertation, is to some degree or another already preset. That there are predetermined logical boundaries for what it is that you're supposed to be doing. This is assuming that there aren't already templates and guidances that your university has provided you. And by the way, if they haven't, links in the description. I don't know why you're wasting your time and not checking out the templates. We do these for people. Like, this is not for nothing. But the point is, these guidances are there, and those strict requirements for what's going to be functionally required by your process or your thesis or your dissertation is also already there. So if you find yourself in a position where you're asking yourself those moral questions, what should I say next? What should I write next? What should the next part of my thesis or my dissertation be? You know you're already heading in the wrong direction. It's much rather what's required next. And the way you can work that out is exactly as you were saying, Amy, is that you break the process down, you go back from the beginning, you look at everything that's required for you to do, functionally speaking, in order to justify what you've already done and explain whatever remains. And then that's the very, very next step.
I love that. What you're talking about is taking a practical, I always take a very practical approach. A client comes to me and says, I don't know what to do next. So my question is, well, what's due first? What's the timeline? What's the next thing that's due? That's what you do next, But what you're talking about, it just reminds me of like this whole process is so psychological, right? There's so much self-doubt and all of that it really impedes progress. So I think that is speaking a lot to what we're talking about is how do you make it a little less psychological? Like, how do you deal with the self-doubt in it? That'll be another podcast. But I think going back to just taking action does it. Again, getting out of your head and writing something down, typing something, just taking some sort of step to get yourself out of the psychological part of this. There's a reason that a very, very small percentage of people get their advanced degrees. And that's this moment. That's this moment right now, that feeling that you're having of being overwhelmed. What I tell people is that what I have found is that the most important thing, the most important difference between someone who successfully completes the process and gets their big fancy degrees and someone who doesn't is the willingness to push past these feelings of being overwhelmed. And that, of course, I'm simplifying it, making it sound easy. It's not easy, but that's the point. It's not easy, but that's a part of the challenge. It has to be a part of the reason that you initially got into this to begin with. You wanted this challenge. You wanted this, right? So here it is. This is the moment. This is the deciding moment for you. What are you going to do?
Bars. I love it. Bars, Amy. What are you going to do? Like, why are you putting the pressure on? I love it. But it's facts. What you're saying is absolutely the case. Look, I mean, if you're being honest with yourself, the truth is that it is easier to quit at this stage. It is. It's easier to quit in the sense of, you can flick a pen and just say, I quit this thing and I don't want to do it anymore. And you can put it out of your head like you have done for the months or the weeks that you've spent not looking at your paper and just pretend it never happened in the first place. But the truth is, if you're being honest with yourself, it's exactly what you said, Amy, that if you know there's going to be some anxiety involved in this process, or in fact, if there has been some anxiety, some discomfort, and some sense of being overwhelmed by the process up until now, it's only because you value it. Like, if you didn't care, you wouldn't have the anxiety about it. And if you didn't value anything, you couldn't be overwhelmed by it. I mean, how do I get overwhelmed by something I don't care about? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So it's precisely because it means something to me that I'm being overwhelmed. And it's precisely because it means something to me that I'm feeling a degree of anxiety. So how much worse is it going to feel if I do quit? So while it's the case that quitting is, in a manner of speaking, easier, there's enormous value to just committing to what you're doing and pressing on. All right, look, seeing as we're into these kind of like slightly more conceptual, abstract waters, I'm going to cite one of our old sources. And, for those of you who've been watching the podcast in the past, I like to get a little Japanese with this stuff. So there's this text, I've cited it a couple of times before, called the Hagakure. It's this samurai manual, effectively. It's a philosophical samurai manual. I love that stuff. But in any case, I'm paraphrasing for the purposes of our audience and for the purposes of our topic. But at some point, it says the phrase, when it comes to a choice of either or, there is only the quick choice of effort, since failure is a necessary part of the journey. And this is not particularly difficult. Be determined and advance. And what that means is the struggle, the suffering, the difficulty, the anxiety, the sense of being overwhelmed, exactly like you said, Amy, is implicit to the process. When you set yourself up for doing this in the first place, it's precisely because you didn't think it was going to be easy, and precisely because you didn't think it was going to involve a challenge. You didn't think it wasn't going to involve a challenge, forgive me. You knew it was going to involve a challenge, and you knew this was difficult. That's why you went for it. You're absolutely right in what you're saying here, Amy. So if that's the case, there really isn't a difficult choice to be made. The only choice is to continue to press forward, even if that leads to more difficulty, more struggle, more suffering. What comes out the other side of that is a beast. Like, what you get out of the other side of that success is just sheer power and glory. I mean, the victory is what the victory is. What's that famous phrase? It's always darkest before the dawn. All right, so put on some nighttime vision goggles. Make your way around darkest before the dawn. You'll be fine. But I agree with you 100%. The harder it is, the more you need to commit. The more difficult it is, the more certain it is that it means something to you, so you can just keep pressing forward this.
And what I tell people is, it is so worth it in the end. It really is worth it. I promise you, it's worth it. But yeah, and you talk about it's easier to quit. Is it? You know what I mean? Like, is it easier to quit? I don't know. You talk about suffering, like, imagine that feeling of, okay, I'm quit, I'm done. You quit on something that you challenge yourself to do. How's that going to feel? The feeling of being overwhelmed is temporary, like all feelings, if we're going to get sort of spiritual with it. All feelings are temporary, Dr. E.
I feel like somebody in the background should be like, yes.
Being overwhelmed is a feeling. It'll pass. But that feeling of quitting will stay with you. Will stick with you. You know what I mean?
And just like that, although the podcast has to pass, the lessons taken from it will stick with you. See what I did there? See how we wrap all this up? Right? All right, okay. So look, let me just to wrap this up and to bring us back to where we started and get a sense of everything we're talking about. What we're saying here is that getting unstuck in the process of writing your dissertation or your thesis or anything like that, especially when you've been there for a while, requires any one of these three things that we've mentioned. So the first one that we talked about was remembering what got you started in the first place, the value, the contribution that you were pursuing. Number two, we said being that squeaky wheel. So deliberately, intentionally annoying, trying to get the attention that you think that the thesis warrants and deserves, and taking ownership of that process. And then lastly, and most importantly, is breaking down the pieces of the puzzle. So breaking down the process in a functional fashion into its actionable steps, little things that you can do in the course of a day, and even rewarding yourself for getting those done. And those three would work. Either that, if none of those do, as Nietzsche once said, if you see somebody stood on the precipice, first thing you should do, push them over the edge. And hopefully today's podcast was the right kind of shove, you know what I mean? So either now you're careening towards the ground, not knowing what you're doing, or you feel a little bit safer on the ground, heading in the right direction. Either way, we did our job, right? Amy, thank you for joining me in today's episode of the podcast, on helping us to get unstuck with our research process. It's been a pleasure having you.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so that wraps up today's episode. Remember, if you're still finding yourself stuck in the process, you can grab a free copy of our work, Smarter Templates, which you'll find in the link in the description below, down there somewhere. If you got value from today's video, then of course, please feel free to click through all the other videos that we've got on the podcast and all the other blogs that we've got and all the other information we provide. I ain't do all of this for nothing, you know what I'm saying? I look real good today for you guys. But the point is, you can find all the other information that you need in helping you through the process on the Grad Coach YouTube or on the Grad Coach website. Check out our blog. It's been a pleasure having you guys here. We will see you again soon.